I wanted to ask you, you were mentioning about how you used to go to the movies and climb over the roof.
Oh, tell about the movies.
Oh, when I look back, I laugh.
Saturday matinee was a big thing for all the kids.
There were various ways that we would see movies. When I was younger, we had what is known as the half-check approach. You would buy a ticket for, let's say, about 3 cents, maybe a nickel, and when you go into the door, a man would cut that ticket and he would tear it in half. You would keep a half and he would keep a half.
They still do that.
Yeah?
They always tear your kick in half and give you the other half.
Yeah, well, but for a different reason. The reason changed. In those days, you would walk in with a couple of sandwiches because you knew you're going to see 2 features and a weekly episode, which changed every week.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
But anyhow, you'd go in with that half check in your pocket. And you could come in at any part of the movies. It doesn't make any difference. You come in the middle of the movies, right? And you would watch that movies until you came back to where you came in. And the movies continued until the end of that film. Then all the lights in the theater opened. The movies, all the lights went on. The movie's projector stopped. And we had a group of women walking through the building, ushers, collecting half checks. Now they went down every aisle in the movies collecting your half check. They said after that half check was collected, you could see one more sequence of films. Because when the next sequence, the lights would go on and you didn't have a half check anymore because you gave it up, you go out of the theater. You couldn't stay there any longer. But by that time you've had your lunch and you spent about 3 or 4 hours there. So it was an interesting experience. Of course, I think Laura mentioned the other time that they also had a babysitting outfit in the movies where a mother could bring her baby and leave her name with the baby carriage. And every once in a while, in the middle of the film, the projector would put up a sign, "There's a baby crying in the outside. Will the mother please go out?" They'd get up and run outside.
They had an outdoor court
they'd run outside
the theater, and they had people watching the babies. Ilana just reminded me about something I told her. When we lived on 142nd Street, there are a lot of kids. There's no problem about friends. In fact, we used to have, they might call it gangs or groups or something, but where I lived, it was particularly funny because the groups are divided into Litvoks and Galicianas. And if any new person came into the neighborhood, they'd say, "Are you a Litvok or a Galiciana?" And if the kid didn't know, so he said, "Well, how do you say bread and butter?" And if they said, "Bread but puta," they said, "You're a Litvok, go with this gang." If they say bread but pita, they said, "Go with that guy." And we called it a gang. Actually, there was like a leader of each group. I recall, I still recall the name of the leader of the Litvoks, Selma Keel, and the leader of the Galicianas were Esther Rip. And we used to have groups like that. Crazy.
It wonders sometimes how we spent some days, for example. We used to love baseball. Now, I was a Giant fan, and how do you get to the Giant? You go to the Polo Grounds on 55th Street. Very often we didn't have a nickel for the subway. We'd sneak under the turnstile. You get up at 155th Street, you go to the Polo Grounds. How do you get in now? The ticket of admission was 50 cents, and you didn't have it. So you offered to clean the seats. They would lend you 2 brushes, to fit on your hand like gloves, and you would dust the seats of the Polo Grounds. Now, I don't have to tell you, it's a pretty big place, and they would sit 50,000 people. So they had a whole bunch of boys doing that. When you were through dusting the seats, they allowed you to sit in the bleachers. So we saw a free ball game. We also had another device. They used to sell Coca-Cola in bottles. There was a 6-ounce bottle. And when they were through with the Coca-Cola bottle, they threw it under the chair, under the seat. Well, we would go around with big cloth shopping bags that our mothers would make, and we would pick up these bottles. And then we'd take them to the local grocery, and we would get 2 cents a bottle. So, we would get money that way. Now, how did we get into our movies? Sometimes it was a nickel, sometimes a dime. When they went up to about a dime or so, we began to run into problems. We also had what is known as a roof garden for the movies. Many movies had an outdoor movies on top of the roof of that movies. And it's just like the outdoor theater today, only this would be on top of the movie. Well, during the rain or some of the seats would get dirty, or there would be dust in the city. We would do the same thing there. Dust the seats and they'd let you watch the movies. But sometimes there'd be too many boys and they couldn't get in. Well, we had a movies on 116th Street between 5th and Lenox Avenue. I forget the name at the moment. And directly opposite to that movies was a big temple, a synagogue. I think the name was Ohap Tzedek. It was a very big synagogue. And it had a lip on the roof, about 3 feet wide. We would sneak up at night, especially at night, because the movies at night, you couldn't project it during the day. You couldn't see it during the day. But at night, they had a night show. So we would climb up the fire escapes to the roof of the Ohap Tzedek, and we would go over to that lip of the edge of the roof, and we would sit down and watch the movies across the street. Of course, we couldn't hear anything, and it would be very, very hard to read the script. But it didn't matter, we saw something. However, the thought of it today frightens me, because as we sat on the roof, there was nothing to protect us from falling down about 150 feet. Because we were in the front of the building, there was no fire escape or anything in the front. If you fell, you went down 150 feet. But it never bothered us. Today, I'm terrified at height. There was a Loews at 116th Street between, I think, Lenox and 7th Avenue. And they had more sophisticated movies than Lindemann. How do we get into the Loews? There you had to pay 15 cents or maybe sometimes a quarter. Well, we'd go around to 115th Street, which was a block away, and they had a men's bathhouse where men used to take baths there, you know, like a public bathhouse. You take a bath there, or a shower, things like that. A sauna, things like that, things like that. So we would sneak around the back of the show.
Turkish bath.
Turkish bath is the name, yeah, they call it Turkish bath. And we would sneak around the back of the bathhouse, climb on the fire escape, go up to the 6th floor or something, and then there was a little alley, and if you jumped across the alley, you land on the fire escape of the Loews movies. If you missed, you fell down 6 flights. So usually you would die. However, none of my friends ever missed. We always made we happened to jump across. It was only about 3 or 4 feet, so we were able to jump across. Our mothers never knew this. And we would rattle the door a little. Somebody on the inside would open the door to see who was rattling the door, and then we would walk in. And so we would watch the movies.
I shudder when I hear the stories, but
it was
don't
a very
think this
trying
is typical,
thing.
because we had a very sheltered life. Mama took very good care of us and always knew where we were. We never did anything like that. In fact, I never learned how to roller skate, because Mama once heard that a kid on a roller skate rolled down a hill and then was killed, or who knows what. Therefore, I never learned. She never let me have roller skates. And many mothers were very much aware of where the kids were and what they were doing. Don't get the impression that just because it was 1930, 25 or whatever it was, that every kid did that. That was very unusual. We didn't have anything like that. Nothing. Mama was always with us.
We did things.
Watching us, doing things. We weren't so wild.
Well, my mother used to work, and when she worked, she couldn't watch us.
Well, unfortunately, I don't want to get into any discussion.
But we had a kind of a wild life in Harlem. We lived on the 4th floor. We always lived on the 4th floor or 5th floor. because they were always walk-ups. You only had one, they had no elevators. We would walk up. And you live on the 4th or 5th floor, it was cheaper than if you lived on the 1st floor. It was less desirable to walk up 5 flights and...
What about going to the bathroom? You mentioned that you didn't have one.
Oh, downtown, yeah. Well, I was born on the Lower East Side. And they had a rather primitive bed. There was no bathroom in the apartment. But if we, as we lived on the 5th floor, they had a toilet in the yard downstairs. So if you had to use the toilet, you had to run down 4 or 5 flights. And sometimes it rained and sometimes it snowed and there would be ice there. It was not a very, very comfortable experience. And the only paper we ever used was the newspaper or the Sears Roebuck catalog or the telephone book. You know, when they were out of date, people would throw them away. And we would grab a telephone book, and that would be our toilet paper.
Okay,
The Sears Roebuck catalog had one objection. They had a lot of glossy paper there. And glossy paper is not the best paper for a toilet.
May I say something? I don't want you to get the impression that that was what everybody did. We weren't well off. We lived in a poor neighborhood, but we had a bathroom in the house, always. All it had was a toilet with the tank on top, and you pull a chain so the water would come down. But we had a bathtub, no shower, but we had a bathtub, and nothing like what he described at all.